Welcome back to another one of our plant talks live streamed on the Zooms, the YouTubes, and the interweb in general. My name is Dan Hartwig. I'm a certified nursery professional according to the Colorado Nursery and Greenhouse Association. I hold a Associates of Applied Science in Landscape and Horticulture from Front Range Community College. And today we are going to be talking about planning your perennial garden. Because you know what? Ultimately, that is what we do in this over the winter. We look at our seed catalogs, we drink hot beverages, we watch college basketball, and we look out the window waiting for it to be springtime. Well, it's getting pretty close out there, folks, so let's talk about planning our perennial beds. This talk is going to be geared toward a homeowner installation of a small, we're talking like 100 square foot perennial bed. 100 square feet, Dan, that's not much, is it? No, it's not. But here's the thing is, I am convinced that we have only a small, limited, certain amount of gardening mow that we are blessed to us by the maker every growing season. When it's gone, it's gone. It's tough to get a gardening mow refill. 100 square foot is a good project for one season. Gardening, landscaping on the homeowner level, it's supposed to be fun. If you make this a chore, you're not going to be coming back and doing it. There's nothing that makes me sadder than one of my customers saying, Dan, last thing I need here and my landscape will be done. Well, landscape should always be a living thing, a work in progress. So let's talk about, as a homeowner, how we can plan for about 100 square foot perennial bed. First of all, it's a silly question, what's a perennial? Now, physiologically, a perennial is any plant that's life cycle takes more than one season to complete. So, a cottonwood is a perennial. We're not talking that for this our purposes of that. Usually what we're talking about in our industry when we say a perennial is what we call an herbaceous perennial. Herbaceous perennial means this plant doesn't have woody tissue. It is all herbaceous plant material. As a result of that, with a few small exceptions, every bit of this plant that we see above the level of the soil is going to die off over the winter, come back in the spring. It does not replicate itself by seed. Well, some of them may, but what will be seen as our perennial plant will be from the living root tissue that has survived the winter. Okay, how do I plan as a homeowner a perennial garden? Step one, before we do anything, before we start looking at all the seed catalogs, all the awesome pictures on nursery websites, all the magazines, the Pinterest, is we call 811. Why would I do such a thing? I haven't even started to plan that. I'm nowhere close to being ready to dig. We call 811 because this may significantly impact where we can put this bed. If you wait to get your utility location until the very last step, you may have to start this whole process over again, and that's going to make it a lot less enjoyable. So step one, call 811. You can do it online. Get your utility location done. For a residential utility location, they only have 72 hours to do it, 3 business days. They will get it done quickly. Friendly reminder, they will not locate low voltage utilities such as fiber optic or cable internet. Yeah, that happened at my place. All right. Choose the location of your bed first. You can't just take a design and walk around your home and find a place for it. Start with the place, then move on to your plants. All right. Pick a size and a shape for it. Generally speaking, about 6 feet is the minimum depth we want as a perennial bed. A lot of perennial beds end up as foundation plantings, meaning this is what comes right up to your home. Beds less than 6 feet will have difficulty with plant health. They will not have a lot of visual interest. Most first-time perennial bed designers will make, including myself at my place before I got my horticulture education, will make their perennial bed too small. 6 feet deep, it should be accessible by 2 sides. That is for caring for your plants and for watering them. Avoid cramscaping. I'm going to talk about that before we even get on there. So the great thing about perennials is they have less insect and disease pressures than any other plant in our industry. They have less insect disease problems than evergreens, than woody shrubs, than woody trees. We will talk about the number one disease pressure on our perennials is our fungal problems, specifically powdery mildew, which is almost always a result of overwatering and poor air circulation. We'll talk a little bit more about disease prevention, but disease prevention should be part of your design. Plants, just like people, they need a little room to breathe. All right, so how do I design a perennial bed? I've called 811. I've chosen the location for my bed. I've realized that at least 6 foot deep. I mean, 6 foot deep only gives me about 18 feet wide for a 100 square foot bed. I think that is a good amount of work to take off to take on for one season. Two ways you can do this. You can do your layout on paper. You can get graph paper, do a scale sketch of your area. You can also do this in real life. One of the best ways to visualize the size and shape of a bed, lay out your garden hose as the perimeter of this bed. This will give you an idea, do I like the place of this perennial bed by my home, by my garden shed, out in the landscape on its own where it's going to be? Great thing about a garden hose is you can come up with boundary designs that are not square. Make it oblong, make it curved. At this time, you're going to do something that you probably seems a little unusual, is you are going to go get your lawnmower. The reason we're going to do that is we're going to make sure that we have laid out the borders of our bed in a way that they're easy to mow around. This is the time to realize that your lawnmower cannot make that tight a turn. Not after you've filled it with expensive plant material that you put a lot of labor and a lot of love to get into the ground. All right, design rules. You will hear all through our industry about what the rules are about designing a landscape. Remember, there's no rules in this. These are guidelines. They're best practices. Don't let anyone tell you what to do. This is your garden. Make it so you love it. However, since rules are meant to be broken, I'm going to say here are a few rules. They're meant to be broken. People like to look at odd numbers. I'm sure there's some psychology behind this. I don't understand what it is, but plants laid out in groups of 3, 5, and 7 are visually appealing. It's generally agreed that the only acceptable even number for plants is 2. Now, repeat your groups. Say that I have a small companion planting. Say I have decided that my companion planting, 3 plants I'm going to use are Russian sage, daylily, and moonbeam coreopsis. These are things I like to put together because they have different textures, different flower colors, but similar blooming times. Repeat that grouping throughout your landscape if that's something you like to look at. All right. As a rule, we put the tall stuff in the back. Again, another rule meant to be broken. Putting the tall stuff in the back, medium stuff in the middle, and short stuff in the front can create a stadium seating type pattern, which may or may not be that visually appealing. Do not be afraid to put a few select taller plants toward where you're going to be looking at it. Combine size, shape, and texture. Now, don't be afraid to mix in some woody plants into your perennial garden, as long as they have similar watering needs. For example, I don't want to put a Russian sage next to a hosta. Hosta likes frequent waterings, likes shade. Russian sage likes deep but infrequent watering, full sun. Now, how am I going to pick out my plants for this? I'm not a certified nursery professional. I don't hold a well, I am, but as a homeowner, you may or may not be. Don't start with the plant. Start with the place. On your drawing, on your sketch, say, label things like tall blue shrub, short yellow flower, light sage colored leafy perennial. don't start with the plant. Start with the place. Figure out what you like to look at and come see your nursery professional here at Fossil Creek, and we can give you a number of choices that would fit the description: small blue shrub, large fine textured flower. Start with the place. Start with what you want to look at. One of the last things we should be deciding is what kind of plant I'm looking at there. All right. Design-wise, people like to look at triangles. Avoid rows and columns. We do not want to line up our plants like little soldiers and sailors. It is visually unappealing. It is over-structured landscaping. Ultimately, what we're kind of trying to do is reproduce patterns we see in nature. Nature does, with few exceptions, does not line up things in rows and columns. Plan for mature size. Okay, as a rule with perennials, you're going to be buying them in what we call a number 1 container. I used to be able to call it a 1-gallon container, but my industry keeps on shrinking it. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture insists that we label it by its metric size. You'll see that as a 2.4 liter at our nursery here. We call it a number 1. Remember, some of these plants will not get much bigger than that container size, which is about 7 inches across. Some of them will get significantly bigger. Give your plants room to grow. Okay, you will need more plants than you think. Always. If for a 100 square foot bed, if you are planting plants 8 inches on center, some examples of plants you might want to put that close are Siberian iris. There's not a lot of plants we're going to put that close. You're going to need 225 of them to fill up that bed. Now, 12 inch on center, we're still going to need 100 plants. 36 inches on center, we're going to need about 12 plants. You will always need more than you think. The great thing about dealing with small container sizes like this is we can do what we call a dry fit. It's just like in carpentry. I put 2 pieces together before I put glue or screws to them. Lay out your plants in that bed, even if it's in the bed shaped out by your hose. You will need more plants than you think. Sparse landscapes look poor. Appealing landscapes are full. All right, site preparation. I'm going to be saying this again over and over again this season. Test, don't guess. People come in to me and say, Dan, I'm having the following problems with my plants. What is going on with them? And I hate to say it, but the answer is going to be a guess a lot of the times, unless you get a soil test. Hey, we're lucky here in our community. Colorado State Extension charges $45 for the basic panel of a soil test. It is the best $45 you can spend in a landscape. The instructions are all online. They're doing it all mail order right now. There's no need to get a test kit. You are going to put that sample according to their instructions in your own container. You're going to mail it to the address given, and you're not going to pay them a dime until they invoice you. They will invoice you via email, and they'll ask, what are the tests you want us to conduct on this sample? You'll want the basic panel. That basic panel will give us information about the soil's texture. That means the ratio of the 4 components of that soil, which are clay, sand, silt, and organic matter. Now, a nice combination of those is what we call loam. You're not going to find that in northern Colorado. If you happen to be lucky enough to live in a home that's been occupied for 100 years and had a landscape for that time, you're going to have good soil. There's going to be a lot of decaying organic material. If you're in new construction, your test is going to come back with the results of about 90% clay, 10% construction debris. Get that test done, and the great thing is Colorado State Extension will conduct that test, and if you tell them what you plan to grow in there, for example, full sun perennial garden, they will recommend an amendment plan. But the amendment that's almost always going to come back on their recommendations, and even if you choose not to conduct a soil test, you're going to have to add organic material to your soil. Instead of amending each planting hole, I'm going to recommend strongly you amend the whole bed. The first season, put 2 inches of compost on top of that. It's tough to call it it's tough to call it soil. It's almost going to be dirt, but on top of your soil, spade it all into a depth of at least 6 to 8 inches. If you do the whole bed, you're going to create so much more airspace for those roots, and also that way you can plant your perennials and small shrubs anywhere you want in that area. All right, plant selection. Remember, this is your choice. Just ignore the rules. Any 2 plants you like to look at is a good companion planting. Any 3 plants you like to look at is a good design group. Any bed full of plants that make you happy to look at is a good design. Remember, this is for you. You're doing this for fun. You're not doing this because you need any of these plants. Also, with plant selection, start with the easy stuff. Your certified nursery professional can recommend old, proven cultivars. I like to recommend cultivars that my grandmother would have heard of. Start with the common, proven cultivars. Then, as your experience improves, move on to the exotics. Now, that being said, would you believe I lost my train of thought there? Start with easy to grow stuff. Also, your nursery, Fossil Creek Nursery, our growers will send us plants that the employees here have never heard of. They are brand new cultivars. If you can't live without one, I've been known to pick out plants just on them having a clever name. If you can't live without them, give it a try. But here's the problem. I may never see those again. It could turn out that this is a cultivar that is not popular, that does not thrive here in northern Colorado. Pick plants your grandmother would have heard of. Also, here's the thing is, you're going to lose, no matter how well you care for these, you're going to lose some of your plants. I would expect to lose between 5 and 10% of my plants, even if they're well cared for. Now, if you buy a Stella de Oro daylily, I get hundreds of those every year. I can replace that. If you get a clever new cultivar and buy it on the strength of its name, I may never be able to get that again. Now, just remember, plants don't need to match. They just need to go. No one's going to call you out for having a slightly different shade or texture of yellow coreopsis. Doesn't need to match, just needs to go. All right. We're not going to talk a lot about care of your perennial bed during this talk. I'm really sticking more toward planning it, but plan your bed in a way that you can maintain it. Now, I'm always going to recommend hand watering. The reason why is automatic irrigation, especially drip systems, they're not smart. That's what people say about, I don't have a smart TV, but it's got a good personality. Your automatic irrigation system is not smart. It thinks that plant needs the same amount of water every time it's watered. You know what? How much water do I need? Well, on a 90-degree day, if I'm out working in the sun, I need a lot. If I'm hanging out at home watching college basketball in the wintertime, I don't need a lot. If I'm given the same amount of water regardless of that, I'm going to feel unwell. Most important thing with your perennials is to give them deep but infrequent waterings. Let your beds dry out a little bit between waterings. The best tool for that is sticking your fingers in the soil. Scrape back that mulch. Stick your fingers in the soil. If it's dry to an inch or two, it's time to water it. If it's not, just say a couple nice things about your plant and check it again the next day. Okay, overcrowding leads to poor plant growth. Overcrowding leads to disease pressures, specifically fungus. A note about fungicides, they are preventative. Once you see signs and symptoms of fungus on your plant, that fungus has almost entirely completed its life cycle. What you're seeing is the fruiting body of that fungus, which means it has already done its damage and is going to die. What that means is the first thing we should always try to do with insect and disease problems is cultural practices. And what I mean by that is spacing, air, pruning, watering, and do buy some fungicide for read, follow, and understand the instructions. That's preventative. It's for early next season. It's not going to help this season. All right. No landscape is maintenance free, and when we're dealing with herbaceous perennials, we are going to have to anticipate digging them up and splitting them eventually. The great thing about that is you're getting more plant material. You can replant it in other areas of your landscape. You can give it to a friend. We're going to want to dig up and split our herbaceous perennials and ornamental grasses when they are not in flower. Okay, weed barrier, no. Soil is a living thing. We're not going to use weed barrier. That's basically choking off the soil from its supply of water, air, and nutrients. We're going to use mulch. What kind of mulch? Any organic mulch. Does not matter. We're never going to pull up our mulch. We're going to add new mulch on top of that as the lower layers decay and add organic material to that soil. All right. Last thing, we've spent all this time, all this effort. What am I going to do in the wintertime? Well, what I'm not going to do is start cutting all this stuff back. We are going to let our perennial beds overwinter as is. It's part of that plant's natural life cycle. It gives the beneficial insects in our garden a place to live. We're going to cut that back within an inch or two of the ground, basically early spring when we see signs of life. Until then, though, remember, the most challenging thing about our winters here in northern Colorado isn't how cold they are, it's how dry they are. You must, especially the first couple seasons, and it's certainly a good practice to keep doing, is winter watering. At least once a month, on a day where it's above freezing, no snow on the ground, give your perennial beds a good drink. The challenging thing about our winters is not how cold they are. Again, I say how dry they are. We want our perennial bed to get frozen and stay frozen. And we do that by keeping it wet. Having it freeze, thaw all winter long is really challenging. So remember winter watering. All right, I'm going a little long on time. I'd love to answer any questions you may have, and I'm gonna ask my friend Liz to come over and look into shutting this thing down. Because she knows how to work this, and I really don't. All right. Hey, thanks so much for your time today. I'm glad y'all decided to join us here at Fossil Creek Nursery and bring in any other questions you have about planning and caring of your perennial garden. Y'all have a great day.